Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For Christ Jesus our Lord, and the kingdom, power, and glory. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so we are on to the next module here. For those who are watching live, you can see I sent the presentation. You all got it in WhatsApp, the presentation? Okay. And everybody got the book that I sent you guys a couple of weeks ago? Okay. I was hopeful that you guys would read the book and read at least parts of it until we meet, but I am confident that you have not. So my confidence in you is very high. So I don't need to introduce myself. I've taught you for years already. So, but I put the church history module together. So, my goal is to be out of here at a reasonable time today because my son's birthday party is today, and they're all setting up at the house right now. So I want to go home. The church history module is probably not going to take as long as you think. I know the book was like 27 pages, but we're not going to do about half that book because more than half of it is actually all references, okay? And the other half is also just a detailed, concentrated section on the Islamic conquest of Egypt, which we won't focus on. We will focus on the Islamic conquest of Egypt. It's part of the church history. It's a big part of the church history. It changes everything. But it's going to be maybe 2 presentations. This will be 1 presentation. I imagine church history will be at most 3, maybe 4 presentations with the test. So it's not going to take as long as you think. It is kind of dry because history tends to be dry. It's my personal favorite subject along with patristics, okay? It and patristics are the 2 subjects that I assist with at the seminary the most, okay? So I'm a teaching assistant at the seminary, and history and patristics are what I focus on the most in those 2 departments, okay? So that's why I did the patristics and I'm doing the history. And I know you guys just finished New Testament with Gigi, which took a lot longer than expected because obviously we had a major bomb drop in the middle of the whole time frame on everybody here in the church. And so everything kind of just got delayed. And then before that, what was it? We did Old Testament with Vicky. So you guys got through that. We are keeping track of who passes and what grades you guys are getting and who's consistently taking all the tests. And it's working. There's a few people who have taken 1 but not the other 2. Some who have taken 2 but not 1. Some names are showing up once and others are not showing up at all. So we're going to be able to, by the end of the whole thing, filter out who is going to be qualified to serve here at the church. It's working exactly as we expected, basically. So thank God for that. Now that we're past the situation we went through recently, we'll be able to kind of get on a better time schedule and get through these modules in a more timely fashion. After history, I believe we're going on to either dogma or apologetics. I forget. I think it's dogma, and it's going to be Tim, Vicky's husband, who'll teach that. Okay, so let's get going with history. So a very basic introduction in history that we know for the Coptic Church is that, and if the writing is too small, you can follow along on your phone. I hope you're not looking at anything else other than this, but it's here. A very basic introduction, like I said, is that St. Mark, who is one of the 70 disciples commissioned by Christ, sometimes we say 72, came to Egypt around 66 AD, roughly 33 years after Christ's death on the cross. So he was already he was older, you know. He came late in his life to Egypt in 66 AD. The Hagiography, which is a fancy word for the historical documentation, or the story, the Hagiography of St. Mark has some mixed information, but in general we know a couple of things which are very important to know for the basis of the start of the Coptic Church. We know that he met St. Inianus, who was a Jewish shoemaker, though we often depict him as pagan. He was actually Jewish. He was a Jewish shoemaker. Shoemaker is somebody who makes shoes, right? Good? Cool. All right, just making sure we're on the same page. As he was repairing the torn sandal of St. Mark, he injured his hand and was healed by St. Mark. Most of us grew up hearing this story, and we know this about St. Mark's story, that if you heard the story of St. Mark, you heard about him walking into the streets in Egypt and tripping and his sandal being torn apart. He goes to a shoemaker. The shoemaker is fixing it and talking to him, and they're going on and on. Then he pierces his hand with a needle and cries out, something like, "O unknown God." Okay? St. Mark takes the opportunity to speak to him and says, "Hey, this unknown God that you're talking about, who is it?" He's an unknown God. Okay? He said, "Well, let me tell you about the unknown God, because I had a chance to serve with all the apostles and disciples and to know this God that you see as the unknown God." Of course, he was talking about Christ. And he preaches to him about Christ, and ultimately St. Inianus and his household would be baptized by St. Mark, and he would become the next leader of the church. Okay? St. Mark basically goes on to... St. Mark, by the way, if you don't know, he's right here. He preaches first in what is today Palestine, okay, or Israel in general. He preaches in Palestine. He was Jewish. I mean, you could say he's Palestinian or Jewish, but he was from that region, so he preaches there first, okay? And then he goes and preaches in what is known as Syria today, and then he goes on to preach. He doesn't spend very much time in Syria, because Syria is really preached to by St. Peter mostly, but he preaches in the Syria area, and then he goes to Egypt, okay? And then Sudan and Ethiopia, okay? And then he comes back up to Sudan and back to Egypt, where he ultimately gets martyred, okay? So he preaches basically in that sort of Middle East, that general Middle East period area, okay? So he's responsible for the beginning of the church in the Middle East in general. The Syrian church really credits St. Peter, but Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, which was Ethiopia at the time, Eritrea, Egypt, that whole northern African region is St. Mark, okay? Like I said, this is the most basic beginning of what would become the Coptic Orthodox Church. This is just sort of how it all started, right? You guys ever watched the show How I Met Your Mother? Right? This is how St. Mark met the church, okay? So this is the beginning of the... You can laugh, it's okay, guys. I make jokes. All right, so the start of the church is kind of interesting but solid. And what I'm going to tell you is this. We don't have a lot of solid historical information on the first 11 patriarchs, okay, of the church, except, of course, St. Mark being the first one. But the first 10 or 11 or so, we don't really have very solid historical information on them. Their names are, if you open Coptic Reader and you go to the departed patriarchs, those first 10 names, okay, Avelius, Agrippinus, the other ones that they're listed there, the first 10 after St. Inianus and all of them. We have a little bit on St. Inianus because of his ties to St. Mark, but then we don't have much on the rest after that. We know that the first, I think 2 after St. Inianus were deacons ordained by St. Mark, okay? And so after that, that's it. We even their entries in the Synxar, for being the first pioneers of the church, basically, there isn't a lot to talk about with them, okay? Most of our documented history really begins with St. Demetrius, who's called Demetrius the Vine Dresser, who is the 12th patriarch, okay? So St. Demetrius the Vine Dresser, one unique, interesting thing about him is that he was married, okay? But he did not have marital relations with his wife, okay? So they were married, and sort of like the story of Ibn Abshur Kamil Masan, who was married but didn't have, he didn't sleep with his wife, basically, okay? So they didn't have any marital relations. They were celibate, and so was St. Demetrius. But he was accused at some point in his life that he was a normal husband, and he did something along the lines of, I don't want to tell you a wrong story, but he did something to prove that he really was celibate with his wife, okay? And so that's St. Demetrius. But St. Demetrius plays a much more important role in the history of the church, which I'll tell you about in the next slide, which is that he begins what we know today as the great School of Theology in Alexandria, okay? Realistically, it had been started with St. Mark, but there was nothing happening in it for centuries, and it basically had died out. But the great School of Theology of Alexandria really begins with the implementation of St. Demetrius. And he does some other very interesting things, and that's why we have a lot of history on him. But another interesting factor in the beginning of the church was that the first person to officially have the title of Pope was actually the 13th patriarch, who was Saint Heracles, or Pope Heracles. Okay? Prior to Heracles, we don't have the title Pope. Anybody want to take a venture as to why? It's a very unique thing that happened. If you read the book, you might have known, but like I said, I had no confidence that you read the book. So the reason that happens is because there is a council, okay, that happens where they decide who is in charge of what. Remember, there was 5 major patriarchs in the world, 5 major sees in the world: Constantinople, Alexandria, Rome, and so on. And they said, from now on, Alexandria is in charge of a number of things, including deciding when Easter will be. Okay? Easter changes every year. We know that, right? In that council, they decided that Alexandria, whoever is the patriarch of Alexandria, will decide when Easter is every year. Amongst other things, he would be the ruler or the head of all of Africa and the Middle East and this region, and he was given this huge title. And on top of that, we're going to give him the honorary title of Pope or Papa, which is what was meant by it at that time was to say that he was the highest amongst equals. So Alexandria gained this huge highlight seat that they had, okay? And so Alexandria becomes this major seat, and it already was, but it becomes the major of the majors, okay? Sort of like the elite baseball team in the major leagues, right? They were the seat of the seats, okay? And so the title Pope gets given at that time, and the person who is leading the church at that point is Heraclius, and he gets the title Pope. And from there on, only the person in Alexandria is allowed to be called Pope. Is that still the case today? Who else is called Pope today? Who else? Which other bishop is called Pope? Which other patriarch is called Pope? He's a cool 80-year-old guy. Pretty white. Wears white all the time. So the Roman Pope is given the title Pope now, but it was historically stolen. Okay, they were never supposed to have it. It's just they kind of took it to themselves and just said, you know what, we're going to call ourselves Pope now, and from now on, that's what we're going to call. There was no decree, there was no council, there was no place in which they were given the title Pope. They kind of just grabbed it and went with it, and they still have it till today. Okay, all the other heads of the churches, the ones we name, Marafram II, Abu Antonius I before he passed, the head of the Catholic, the Armenian Church, the Indian Church, they all have different titles. Catholicos is one for the Armenians and for the Syrians and the Indians. Actually, Catholicos is a pretty popular one for all of them, actually, when I think about it. And for the Eritreans and the Ethiopians, it's Abun. Sort of like Abuna, but without the A. Abun, okay? And that's just also a nice title for father, right? And so patriarch or bishop is accepted across the board, but the word pope only applies to the See of Alexandria. For the first roughly 180 years or so, the church is certainly present because we have documentation to show its existence in Egypt, but it doesn't really truly come to full light until around the 180s or so. And that's because of this little project that happened, the School of Alexandria, okay? Once the School of Alexandria is reestablished and arguably established, okay, the church is sort of on the historical map, okay? Remember, in those first 180 years, Christianity itself was barely even a thing, right? So when we say that the first 180 years we don't have a lot of documentation or we don't know a lot about the first 10 or 11 patriarchs, it's because, the church was sort of like if any of you guys are all too young to have been here for it, but when this church started, okay, it was a group of people who went from, a house to pray liturgies until they got an office space and they started praying. It was very small, sort of humble beginnings until now we have this massive 400 plus seat church, right? Big difference, right? That's the same way Christianity really began. It began with people who were, direct descendants of the disciples and the apostles, direct students of the disciples and the apostles. And it was just like they would meet in secret, they would meet quietly because no matter where they were, nobody liked them, okay? And so Christianity started off being this religion that nobody liked, not because it was bad, but because it was threatening other religions, or so they thought, okay? And so the first 180 years, we don't know a whole lot, but Christianity as a whole isn't a whole lot yet. Saint Clement is credited as the first director of the school. Like I said, theoretically, it was really started by Saint Mark and Inianus in the beginning, but we don't have anything to really, say that that's exactly what happens. But Saint Clement, okay, is appointed as the first, I say first with air quotes because arguably there was someone before him in the era of Saint Mark, but Saint Clement is credited as the first director of the school, okay, appointed by Demetrius, Saint Demetrius the vine dresser, the 12th patriarch. But it is really the appointment of Origen, and this is why I left history till after we finished patristics, right? Because you were here for patristics, you should know who Clement is, you should know who Origen is, okay? And so these names shouldn't be foreign to you, okay? And we talked about how Origen was really a central figure in the development of the School of Alexandria. And we mentioned how Clement was the first director of the School of Alexandria. So these things should ring a bell from, oh, you're taking the test right now. I shouldn't be saying that. These questions are probably on the test. So, but anyway, we discuss these things so that we know them by the time we get to history. So it really is the appointment of Origen by Demetrius again that establishes the great school as we have come to know it. And as we know, Origen, we call him the teacher of teachers, okay? Because so many of the fathers credit Origen with their own knowledge of theology and dogma. From there is a golden age of growth. Yes? So the school theoretically had already existed, okay? There was already a place for you to learn about the church, but it was a really, it was not anything it wasn't very good. How was that? Like it was just a very small, there was no real directorship, there was no real, development of it. It was just a small nothing. St. Demetrius comes around and says, look, we need to make this a real thing, and we need to develop, sort of like, servants prep was a thing for a long time, okay, before we made a formal servants prep class, okay? And we put somebody in charge of it, and we said, well, this is what needs to be done, and here's the modules, and here's the list, and we formalized it. And so the person who formalizes the School of Alexandria, if you want to put it this way, is Saint Demetrius, the vine dresser, and he assigns Clement, okay, as its first director. And from there, he also assigns Origen, okay? And Origen was, like I said, the teacher of teachers, the father of fathers. Ironically, not a saint, but we talked about this in the patristics module as well, okay? So from there's a golden age of growth for the foundation of the church that lives until today. Origen is roughly in the early 200s, okay? And he lasts quite a bit, but of course he has his problems and ends up going to Palestine. There's lots of things that happen with Origen, but we talked about them in detail in patristics. But because of his influence on the School of Alexandria and his influence on the development of that church in the beginning, okay, Origen is credited with being one of the most important directors of the School of Alexandria at its foundation. Many of the fathers that would come after this period would credit their work and knowledge to studying Origen. So not necessarily just studying under him, but studying what he actually wrote and what he actually did. Okay? He is a very important figure, not just in patristics, but in the development of the church as a whole. Okay. If you're noticing so far, we're zooming through several hundred years at a time. Okay? By the time I finish today's presentation, we're going to be in the year 600 something, okay? So we're not stopping at any particular century, talking about any particular saint or father. This is unlike patristics. We're zooming through, and by the end, before your test, I'll tell you more or less what I'm looking at, sort of, okay? Because we're not pausing on any particular time period. We're going to pause quite a bit on the Islamic conquest of Egypt, okay? Because it has a crucial importance in how the church is today. And that's what we need to know about the church today. These are all the beginnings and the foundation of the church. And a lot of it we know. Like this slide, you should know most of it already. Diocletian, we've heard of Diocletian, we know Constantine, we know what happens during the era of Diocletian. We can literally spend an entire college semester on Diocletian and his era and what he did to the Christians. What is the importance of Diocletian in the Coptic calendar? Anybody know? Specifically about the Coptic calendar, what is the importance of Diocletian? He becomes emperor in the year 284. Okay, what year is it right now that we're in? 2020 what? 2022. It's also the year what? 1738, which is 2022 minus 284. Okay? Why? I gave you all the pieces of the puzzle. Let's bring it home together. What happens? Why am I mentioning all these numbers? And if you read the slide, it would probably tell you. Okay, it's because the Coptic calendar, the reason we're in the year 1783 is because we begin the Coptic calendar with the year that Diocletian becomes emperor. And why do we do that? Because Diocletian was the most notorious killer, okay, of Christians. He arguably, we used to say that he killed the most Christians in one time period, but over the many, many centuries that would come after, you could argue that others have done worse, but Diocletian's time was absolutely one of the most, the greatest bloodshed of all Christians, okay, happened under Nestorius. I'm sorry, under Diocletian. Nestorius is a whole different story. Diocletian, right? So we begin the Coptic calendar with the year he becomes emperor because the Coptic calendar is what? A calendar about the martyrs, okay? It's a calendar about the martyrs, okay? And so it begins with the guy who killed the most Christians. In the year 284, he begins his reign, okay? The severity of the era of Diocletian was so prominent, if you had read the slide, that the church built its calendar to coincide with the start of his reign as emperor, okay? So many of the martyrs and saints we know, almost all of these people on the wall right now, happened under Diocletian, exception of St. Mark, of course, okay? St. Peter and St. Paul. So we go St. George, okay? Definitely under him. Damiana, Barbara and Juliana, Rebecca and her children, okay? St. Justina, all under the time frame and era of Diocletian, okay? So under the era of persecution of Diocletian, I just looked around the church and just highlighted a whole bunch of people on the wall for you, okay? St. Mina, okay? Another one. So all of these people under Diocletian, and it took me until I was much older to read more about him and to know what really happened. He actually was not a bad guy for like the first half of his reign. He couldn't care less about Christians. He was actually reasonably, I'm not going to say good to Christians, but was at least lukewarm. Something happens in his life where about midway through his time as emperor, he goes, I've had enough of these people and I'm going to kill them all. And he literally says that. And he issues a decree and he says, anybody who doesn't worship the idols, and like in particular those who worship in Christianity, they all must die if they don't worship the idols. Just sweeping order. And what happens is, under Diocletian, something really interesting happens in Roman history. And I would encourage you to just for your own interest, I love history. I'm a scientist by education, but I love history as a thing. The Roman Empire had always had one emperor, okay? One supreme emperor. You think of Caesar and you think of all the great emperors that they had. Diocletian did something interesting. He came and he said, this empire is too large for one person to rule. It's just too much, okay? So he divided it into 4 quadrants, okay? And he said, Maximianus, you're going to be in charge of this region. I'm going to be in charge of this region. And he names 2 others for 2 other regions. And I just named those 2, Maximianus and Maximianus and Diocletian, because they are the 2 names that we hear about the most in the Synaxar. I forget the other 2's name, but one of them also we hear a couple of times. But my point is, those 2 really acted heavy on this. And where was Maximianus' region? It included Egypt. And so that's why we have so many martyrs out of Egypt. Really not just because of Diocletian, but because of Maximianus. Okay? And he was the sort of co-emperor of Rome who covered the region in I know it's not on the slide, but covered the region where Egypt was. And so we have so many martyrs out of Egypt and out of the general, Middle East area, because that's where Maximianus covered. Okay? Constantine, okay, comes up later. He's the son of one of the four. I don't want to say it was Maximianus, but he was the son of one of the four. His mother was a Christian. We know about Queen Helen, okay? His father wasn't, okay? And didn't like that he was becoming a Christian. But after he died, he was the rightful heir to the seat that his father had. At the same time, Constantine actually takes over as, sort of co-emperor for a very short time. Diocletian dies a miserable death, okay? Like a really, really miserable death. Okay, he goes insane, basically. And there's an opening sort of for another supreme emperor. Constantine makes a move, takes the seat as supreme emperor, okay? And reunites the Roman Empire and says, no, we're not doing this whole split that we had with Diocletian, okay? That's not going to work. I'm the supreme leader of the Roman Empire, and here are a couple of decrees that I'm issuing. One of them is, stop the killing of Christians, open the doors of the churches, and allow Christianity to be a legal religion, okay? So Constantine ascends to the throne. Christianity in Egypt had taken, by the time he ascends to the throne, Christianity in Egypt had taken a severe beating, but still stood strong on the blood of its many martyrs. We have some in the back with the martyrs of Akhmim, okay? That was an entire village that was just obliterated. So much so that the ground was soaked in blood. It was like how when you overwater your grass and you step on it and water comes out, there was blood that would come out of the ground. That's how many people died in the streets of Akhmim. And that's why you have so many relics of them, because there were so many people that died and we have so many of their relics and bones. So you can go any church in the world, you could find some relics from Akhmim because there's just so much of them, okay? And that happened in Diocletian as well. So we begin an era of strength in the church after this, okay? With the end of persecution, the Church of Alexandria experienced tremendous growth. In Egypt, Christianity became the absolute majority religion by the year 480, okay? And if you think about what happens from the time Constantine becomes emperor, mid-300s, okay? And at this point, by the way, we said 400, the Council of Nicaea already happens at that point, okay? The Council of Nicaea. And we spent time in patristics on the councils. And I was going to do a slide on just the councils here, and maybe I could next time just to remind you of what they were. But the Council of Nicaea happens with St. Athanasius. He's in the back there, okay? St. Athanasius being the champion of the council. And that council is called by Constantine, okay? And we establish the creed at the Council of Nicaea. So Constantine cannot be undervalued, and his importance and the importance of Queen Helen, who found the cross, cannot be undervalued, okay? And a lot of things other than this, and of course St. Cyril also comes around before the year 400, and so we have some huge names that come around in the church, and a lot of development in the church under Constantine because of it being free. But one of the side effects, guys, one of the side effects of that freedom is a lot of splintering, okay? When a church is free, like we are in the U.S., and this will make sense right now, when a church is free, thought is free. Thought is free. Which meant that anybody can go out and say, they are a little wrong about this, so I'm going to make my own church that believes this. From them, I'm going to do this. Another one who does this. Another one who does this. And does that sound familiar to today? You have the First Baptist Church of Rancho, the First Presbyterian Church of, and they're all non-denominational churches and Baptist churches and Presbyterian churches and evangelical churches, and something like 4,000 different branches of Christianity exist today. Because by becoming legal and by becoming open, so much is allowed to happen in that sense, okay? Another great thing that happens in Egypt during that time is monasticism. Actually, monasticism technically begins while Diocletian is emperor. And we know that part of the story of St. Anthony is that he wanted to become a martyr, and an angel appeared to him and said, no, your calling is not martyrdom. We have something much more important for you to do, okay, which is to develop monasticism, okay? Of course, he didn't know that. It develops around the 3rd and 4th century with St. Anthony and others. From the 3rd to the 5th century, we see a theological golden age in which we see everyone from St. Athanasius to St. Cyril take reign in Egypt. Is it boring enough for you guys? Or I'm trying my best, okay? Just because I enjoy it, I know not everybody likes listening to this. My wife will tell you the same thing. She's bored to death from me. So, okay. Anyway, I'm lucky I have James who actually enjoys this stuff. He couldn't make it today, but so he'll take the test with you guys again, like he with patristics, and he'll kick your butts again. Okay, just so you know. Okay, just so we have that clear from the beginning. Okay. A 9-year-old will beat you in this test, I'm sure. At the Council of Calcedon in 451 AD. So we skipped over Nicaea, Ephesus, Constantinople. I'm assuming you guys have heard about them at this point. You know what happens in each of them, and so on. Okay, but we get to the Council of Calcedon, which is a very important council that we don't recognize, by the way. But at that Council of Calcedon in 451, Saint Dioscoros, who was the patriarch after Saint Cyril. Okay, so Saint Dioscoros, who was after Saint Cyril, was deposed, but never excommunicated officially. And this is a key point that we have to remember till today, because today the Eastern Church likes to say that he was excommunicated and he's a heretic, but according to the minutes of the council, he was never actually excommunicated. He was deposed. He was told, you can't be here, okay? This created the first official faction of the early church, the pro-Chalcedonian, or Malachites, and the anti-Chalcedonians, or the Copts, okay? That's us. And the word Copt, by the way, doesn't just belong to us only, just so you know. There is the Coptic Catholic Church as well, okay? Because what does the word Copt mean? Or Coptic? Egyptian or Egypt, yeah. So Coptic is just Egypt or Egyptian. And so there's the Egyptian Catholic Church, which is the Coptic Catholic Church. And the funny thing about them is, if you were to walk into their church, you won't be able to tell the difference. They look identical to us. I mean, they literally look identical to us. They wear the same clothes. They have the same rites. They do everything exactly the same. Okay? Different liturgy. Okay? Different practice. Different communion. Okay? That's, of course, that's the things that matter. Different base theology. But if you were to look at them from the outside, they look identical to us. Like identical. Okay? So, but this creates the first split, like I said, the pro-Chalcedonian Malachites and the anti-Chalcedonian Coptic people. And this is going to be important as we transition into the Islamic conquest in Egypt. But in brief, thank you, the dominant body among the anti-Chalcedonians recognized Dioscoros as Orthodox and refused to accept the decree of Chalcedon. That's us, okay? We obviously recognize St. Dioscoros, and we accept the decree. We do not accept the decrees of Calcedon. I made just this one slide for you guys here because I want you to know something important that happened out of that, which is the difference between mono and miaphysite. This is key and central to our faith, and it will be covered more in dogma, in the dogma module. But one of the main things that are at the center of the issues in Calcedon was the use of the term monophysite and miaphysite, okay? Theologically, and I want you to pay attention to this because I don't want to confuse myself even when I'm saying it, theologically, the Copts decry their designation as monophysites, which is what they call us, even until today, sadly. They refer to us as monophysites, but we decry this. We don't like this. We actually, really don't like this because it's a heresy to us, okay? It's a heresy that they too have condemned since the 5th century. We've all condemned monophysitism, okay? This is a big politically messy thing that happened between the two Eastern Oriental churches, okay? We've all said that monophysism is a heresy, but they think that we haven't. I don't know what to tell you. Monophysitism maintains that Jesus Christ has only a single divine nature, a proposition that can nowhere be substantiated from the literature of the Coptic Church. Nowhere in our literature, nowhere in our teachings, nowhere in our liturgical practice will you hear the word a single divine nature of Christ. Nowhere. Or a single human nature of Christ. Nowhere. Okay? We do not believe in the single nature. There's no such thing. That's mono, one. Okay? By maintaining that Jesus Christ had one nature, the Coptic Church understands the term in light of the Cyrillian formula of the one incarnate nature, individual of God the Word, which I have here in broken down Greek for you, but it doesn't matter. And hence, the more accurate designation for our Christology is Miaphysitism or Miaphysite. Okay, so why Mia and not mono? Because we do believe that Christ had two natures, divine and human. But we do believe that they were united, never separated, for a twinkling moment or a twinkling of an eye, or we say it during the liturgy, for a single moment or a twinkling of an eye, given to us for salvation. We hear this in the end of the liturgy every day. Okay? We believe that Christ's divine nature and human nature were not combined into one hybrid nature. No, we don't believe that. Okay? We believe that they were never separated. And the example that St. Patrick gives for the Trinity, for example, when he gives the three-leaf clover, it's a single leaf with three little heads on it. Okay? Imagine a two-leaf clover if you want. Okay? Same thing. It's one, but it has two. And it's impossible to really fully understand, right? This chair is both soft and hard at the same time, right? But it's still a chair. I can give you so many different little analogies, but it won't matter, right? I have a body and soul, but you'll never see my soul separate from my body until I'm not here, okay? So this is the same thing. Christ, the two natures, never separated, but never combined, okay? We don't make one nature, not even one hybrid nature, like 50-50. It's not half and half, okay? He is 100 and 100. Okay? Monophysitism says he's either fully divine or fully human, and there's two different aspects of. There are those who, the majority of what you would see as monophysites, believe that he was fully divine. Okay? There are some who believe he was only fully human. That's a much, much more minor sect. Okay? And then there are some who refer to monophysitism as people who believe in a hybrid nature, which is what they think of us. They think that we believe in a hybrid nature where it was like 50% human and 50% divine. No. He's 100% this and 100% that. I'm 100% Kirollos and 100% Guirguis. Okay? So this is how, what we understand is the formula for Christ. All of this will matter when we talk about Islamic conquest. So I'm getting to that. Okay. Post-Calcedon, for the next 2 to 3 centuries, we don't see a lot come out in the form of historical significance in Egypt, as the church was oppressed by the Calcedonian rulers. One of the things that happened after Calcedon, politically, was that Egypt was ruled by the Malachites, okay? And what I mean by ruled is the government in Egypt was a Malachite government. They were a Greek government, okay? And after Calcedon, the council said in Calcedon that we don't entrust the person who is in charge in Egypt, Diocletian, okay? And so Diocletian, Dioscorus, sorry, it's a big difference. Dioscorus, okay? And so we're going to install, Primus, I think was his name, was the first one that they brought in to say that he's the Pope of Alexandria. He was a Greek Malachite Pope, okay? Person. And he never actually shows up to Egypt. That's a funny part of history with him. He never actually goes to Egypt. He's actually too scared to go to Egypt. They think, because he thinks they're going to kill him, which probably would have been true. Okay? So he never actually shows up to Egypt. But somehow, historically, he's the first, Malachite Pope in Egypt. After Dioscorus comes St. Timothy Aurelius, okay? Timothy the second, I want to say, okay? And he's a very peaceful pope. He doesn't want any problems. One of his most famous quotes is about allowing communion for anybody who approaches it. He was a very, very amicable, peaceful person. But they installed somebody in Egypt, another Malachite patriarch, who actually shows up to Egypt and has a stronger hand. And from there, the Malachites have a consistent presence in Egypt. Until today, Egypt has 2 popes that live there, very near each other actually, okay? The irony of 2022 is that they're both named Theodore, okay? Tewodros and Theodore, okay? So the Greek Malachite Calcedonian patriarch today, his name is Theodore. He's a very good looking, very, very white, blue-eyed, like Santa Claus, red cheeks, kind of like, that's how he looks like, okay? He's kind of big guy too. And he was there before Pope Tewodros became Pope, and so he was there with Pope Shenouda, and we actually have a very good friendship with them. Okay, he was there at Pope Shenouda's funeral, he was there at the enthronement of Pope Tewodros. We have a good relationship, like we have a good working relationship, okay? And we recognize each other. We recognize that what's the difference between us inside Egypt is all just political, and it's better to just get along, okay? So we're like friends now, okay, in Egypt. Only took like 1,600 years, right? But we're like, we cool now, you know? Okay? But not really, because we still have a separation, okay? We can't take communion there, they can't take communion with us, okay? So until today, there is a Malachite Pope or Patriarch in Egypt. And he calls himself Pope, by the way, because he believes that he's the rightful Pope. Not him like Theodore, I'm talking about that lineage calls themselves Pope because they believe they're the rightful Pope of Alexandria after Calcedon. There was and still is until today a silent fight for the seat over the See of Alexandria with both a Chalcedonian Patriarch and anti-Chalcedonian Patriarch, that's us. Theologically, Severus of Antioch and Theodosius of Alexandria distinguished themselves as the most articulate spokesmen and theologians for the anti-Chalcedonians in that time frame, from about the year 451 until the year about 630, okay? That's a little less than 200 years, okay? There is this sort of just deafening silence in Egypt because we're just so oppressed by the Malachites. Unfortunately, of their thousands of writings, few are used regularly or relied upon regularly in the Coptic rites. Saint Severus of Antioch, very important saint in the church. Okay, of course, he's from the Syrian church, okay? But he's the only person who's given sort of an honorable mention in the list of our patriarchs. He's like, he was there, you know? He's very, very important. He was the patriarch of the Syrian church, okay? The Syrians did not experience the same oppression as we did. And so their theology developed much differently and arguably better, okay? Ours was oppressed. The Syrians would not have an Islamic conquest, and so they kind of roamed free for a very long time, and they developed very differently. But they are the closest church to us, okay? Both theologically and geographically, okay? The Arab Conquest is where we're going to start off next week, okay? But just to give you a small preview, everything changes from here. Like, everything. The church is completely a different place. Oppression is going to be the key word from now on, but not right away, okay? A lot changes. And we zoomed through the first 400, 500, almost 600 years because we're going to focus a lot on this. And then I'm going to circle back. My plan is to finish Islamic conquest and circle back to the beginning again and highlight some of the things that we kind of zoomed through, like the councils, like, you know, these things. Because it'll be nice. I'm not pretending like I'm some genius who built the system together for you. I'm just kind of thinking as I go with you. I think it's nice to get a... what do they call it? A drone view of the whole thing, and then kind of zoom in a bit on what things matter, right? So when we get a bigger picture of what happens with the church, we've been around for 2,000 years, and for 1,400 of them, we've been under the rule of a completely different religion. So it's a huge difference in the church. And I will tell you how it affected us, how it didn't affect the Syrians and the Indians and our sister churches, the Ethiopians and the Eritreans, okay? How it affected our development and our growth, and how we have like a dead silence for over 1,000 years in the Coptic church. Nobody's writing anything. Nobody's saving anything. There's a fight for language. There's a fight for existence. It's huge. Okay? So come back excited next week. I'm going to tell you some things about Islam that you never thought I would say. And I'm going to tell you some things that you definitely thought I would say. Okay? So I'll see you all next week, but let's pray real quick together before we leave. And next week we might be in the crying room if I can get the live setup in there, because they're obviously a lot more than us, so they need the bigger space. Okay, so but I'll let you know in the group chat. You guys all get the WhatsApp text, right? Yeah, I'll add you before we leave. Okay. In the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. We thank you, Lord, for bringing us here together today to hear a little bit more about the development of the Coptic Church and our history, our glorious history, filled with the blood of martyrs, and your grace always abounds in the church. We ask you through the intercession of the Holy Virgin Mary, Saint Justina, and Saint Hagiography, the intercessor of this class, to hear us when we say with all thanksgiving, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. To Christ Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory from the Father, and